Ari Rastegar is one of the most influential voices in Texas real estate.
The dividends that are paid are so exponential, are so mind-blowing that it'll enhance every single part of this experience of being a human being.
His work has been featured everywhere, from Forbes to the Wall Street Journal.
Through a bunch of dumb stuff, I lost the money. I had it in cash and I lost it. Well, that was 100% of my net worth. So I went to zero. Measuring low state or someone's trauma against someone else's, I think is cruelty.
Quick note before we start. If you have enjoyed this podcast and want to support our incredible guests, please follow Low to Grow Podcast on Instagram and TikTok. Welcome to Low to Grow, the podcast transforming life's toughest moments into opportunity for growth. I'm Annie, a Forbes Under 30 technology founder whose entrepreneurship journey ran parallel to a mental health awakening. In every episode, I sit down with inspiring individuals and delve into how they managed to turn their personal or professional challenges into opportunities for growth. If you're facing uncertainty in your life, feeling down, or simply need a kick of inspiration to keep moving forward, this is your space for the honest and uplifting conversations that you will want to hear. Hit follow so you never miss an episode, and let's dive in. Today, I have the pleasure of sitting down with someone that many call the Oracle of Austin. Ari Rastegar is one of the most influential voices in Texas real estate. He is a visionary, known for turning resilience into a true competitive edge. Ari is a Texas native with a law degree from St. Mary's, and he founded Rastegar Property Company in 2015 and has since built a remarkably diverse portfolio, from multifamily and self-storage to a 600,000 square foot industrial space near Tesla's Gigafactory. Ari is the author of The Gift of Failure, and his work has been featured everywhere, from Forbes to the Wall Street Journal. Ari, welcome to Low to Grow. Who do you want to be listening to our conversation today?
I would like anybody that has a dream, that has a goal, that is looking to grow, that is looking to evolve, that's looking to stay curious, and looking to do something that is going to make some kind of impact in the world in a positive way.
Wonderful. Ari, where does your story start?
Well, my story, I guess, started on April 6, 1982. At 9:27 a.m. when I was born in Austin, Texas. And my journey has taken me through various places across the United States for education, for a couple different community colleges, undergraduate university, a study abroad in Mexico, law school in San Antonio, many, many years in New York City after law school, and made this kind of, this journey of this little squiggly path all the way back here to Austin, Texas, where I own and operate our real estate private equity firm.
You described just there the squiggly path. What actually took you from someone who was at law school to someone who runs a real estate empire?
Well, I wish I could tell you it was completely planned, and it was my objective all along, and I don't think it really was. But I can tell you, while I was in law school, I borrowed about $3,500 to buy a single family lot to build a house while I was in law school, and that really gave me something tangible to understand what it could be like to be a real estate investor. I had a $80,000 interim construction loan to build the house, and we ended up selling it, for $115,000 around 2007, right before the great financial crisis shook the fibers of the financial world, and all of the types of loans and the types of pricing and the demand that existed during that area came to a screeching halt. And so I practiced law for a couple years, and that took me on a journey into the entertainment business, and very quickly running a very large entertainment business, doing very large events for David Guetta, the Black Eyed Peas, Snoop Dogg, very, very large companies, working with corporate sponsors like Sports Illustrated. All of a sudden, an ice storm and Legionnaire's disease threw the unthinkable into that business, which immediately kind of brought me back into the real estate side of the business, but this time at the commercial real estate level, this time with operators that were investing all across the United States. And I went to my network that I built through blocking and tackling by sitting up at the bar at an Italian restaurant in New York City, getting to know the bartender, getting to know wealthy people sitting at the bar, and offering them access to the types of projects that I knew through various operators that were experts in multifamily, experts in self-storage, various repositionings. And through those relationships, I was able to provide my growing investor base to access to deals that they didn't have an opportunity to be a part of, which gave me the ability to not take as much risk, which I didn't really know how to run a real estate company or an investment company at the time, but I knew the people that were running these deals and I trusted them. I was able to do my homework and kind of take the money from this hand into an LLC and then put it in these deals. And once those deals started to monetize, I started to think that, oh, maybe I could be a developer also. I could start to find these deals on my own. And one thing led to another. And now we've invested in 38 cities, 13 states, 7 different asset classes. Our investors are public pension plans, insurance companies, firefighters. We have a very large book of accredited investors. And it's very exciting to see something go from just a piece of land to now an elementary school and, kids coming back and forth out of it and seeing lots developed and seeing industrial facilities be built. It's really an invigorating feeling to know that you can, take a part in having something that starts in your mind that ends up on a blueprint and then ends up being something that you can actually walk into and touch and feel.
That's an incredible story. And you're evidently someone who is amazingly successful. When I was doing some research and listening to some of your previous podcasts, I noticed that you mentioned 2 words, success versus fulfillment. How are they different for you? And also, do you feel fulfilled at the moment?
Thank you for asking. Success and fulfillment, in my experience, and I think the only thing I've gotten really good at this point in my life is failing. And failing properly, I think is also very much a art and a science, not unlike success and fulfillment. So success, I've come to realize, is really a scientific method. And I'll give you an example. So when you went to Oxford, I know one of the most prestigious universities in the world, you started out, it was your first year, you got a syllabus and you looked at that, you saw this major, it was 4 years, 5 years in the future, and they gave you a syllabus. They gave you an outline and said, okay, here's the prerequisites that you need to take. Here's the courses you'll take in your first year. And you pass those courses. Here's the courses you would take in your second year. Here's the courses you would take in your third, fourth. And then by the end of that, you would then have your first degree, so to speak, and you would have been very successful, quite frankly, having this first degree and finishing your college education. I think just about anybody in the world would agree that that would be a very successful attribute to add to your CV or add to your resume. I give that example because that's a scientific approach. You selected something, you had a desire, they laid out a curriculum, it was 1 + 2 + 3, and then you received this degree at the end of it. That to me is a sign of success. Fulfillment is very much an art. Fulfillment is how you feel about that success, your level of maybe your worthiness, your level of empathy, your level of love, your level of gratitude. And a lot of times these emotional sensations that you feel can be the journey to get there. You don't have a syllabus, there's certain core tools maybe you can use. I've used meditation in my life, and I've very often said that my work is my worship and is my way of contributing back to something. But ultimately, I think a lot of people that go after wealth or go after massive success are actually in search of fulfillment. They run 2 parallel paths and can definitely be intertwined. But, one of my mentors for many years, Mr. Tony Robbins, said something that resonated with me so deeply. I've done so many of his seminars, whether Unleash the Power Within or Date with Destiny. I did a virtual seminar, about a month ago. So the path to learning never stops. But he said something that really shook me to my core, and that is success without fulfillment is the ultimate failure. And it kind of hit me to think, wow, it's almost a cliche to see very wealthy people that have broken families or they're just miserable. They have health problems. And you think, oh my gosh, you have all this money, you have all this notoriety, you have all this respect from your peers, but you're miserable. And that didn't seem very fun to me. That didn't seem like the life that I wanted to live. So I I started on a quest about 10 years ago, not only to build something successful, something that I could be, very proud of, to do something for our investors that could build their retirements and create the means or the resources that would allow them to hopefully follow their dreams in retirement and be able to have these meaningful, fulfilling moments with their families or whatever the things that they really love to do. Putting them side by side and figuring out, okay, what could be successful? What can that look like? What can I measure? And then what are the acts and behaviors I can do that would create a beautiful life, create a meaningful life? And I find that they go one and the same because in my experience, one of the words that encapsulates fulfillment is progress. And if you're making progress and you can look back at your journey, whether it's an inch or whether it's a mile, and you are doing somewhere that's forward looking, progress tends to insinuate purpose. And when you have purpose, something that is beyond you, something beyond just something that is about you personally, I think that creates a field or that creates an outlook, that creates a perspective that can house more of those positive, elevated emotions. And by pairing work with progress and something that you're doing for your customers, having an insatiable, relentless drive to serve your customer, to serve your community, to create something very meaningful and useful, and you pair that with empathy, with gratitude and these elevated emotions, it creates almost like a tapestry, so to speak, of both blending success and fulfillment. And I think those together start to create a very meaningful life. And I'm very much early in my journey on that process. Definitely fall out of that into some of those lower base emotions and go back into some of the higher elevated ones. And I find for me, it's like a seesaw, back and forth, but it's definitely a practice, and it's definitely something that needs to be worked on every day. And when you pair it, as I said, with something that's really going to serve millions and millions of people, I think that starts to at least get us closer to what the formula could be.
And can I ask, when was the last time that you felt really fulfilled?
Yesterday.
And what were you doing then?
I was doing a meditation that I learned from Dr. Joe Dispenza. And anybody that's watching this, certainly entrepreneurs that are so riddled with stress, and I've been there. Anybody that knows me knows I have a relentless work ethic. It's in my DNA. I mean, there's been weeks that I didn't leave my office. I slept under my desk. There was times that, I was making $2.86 an hour delivering pizzas to try to get through school. Even after law school, trying to pay student loans, I had an apartment and I was literally sleeping on the floor because I had no furniture. I've been through those places of very high stress moments, and cortisol can be very physiological as well as it can be emotional. And I found that meditation work has been one of the greatest tools, for lack of a better term, to make stress more coherent and be able to make you more productive, more efficient, creating more equanimity so that you can be more clear-headed, that you can make better decisions, not only more strategic and intelligent, but also more ethical in the way that you go about life. There's no way for me to recommend meditation more to any of your listeners. Anything that you're doing in this life with all these different stimuluses that are flying at your head, meditation will find a way for you to calm your mind in such a way, because meditation is preparation for activity. It's not about just zoning out and bumming out on the couch. I think of it as like an arrow that you're pulling back before you fire off. So it's preparing your nervous system, preparing your mind to go in there with that incredible laser focused work ethic that all entrepreneurs need to have to become successful. And yesterday I spent many, many hours doing very particular meditations around the energy centers of my body. The Indian tradition has called it chakras. Dr. Joe has called them energy centers. We've known about this for 10,000 years. Every major culture in the world has talked about them in some capacity. Your three lower energy centers have to do with survival. Then you move into your heart, you move into your throat, you move into your mind. And now what Dr. Joe has done that's so beautiful is he's started to measure them with modern tools. So it's not just some woo-woo concept where, oh, my energy centers, I'm going to go out to the Himalayas. And this is something that we can truly see the field. Every living organism has a field And now we know with our thoughts and our mind, we can start to impact those things. There's been thousands and thousands and thousands of testimonials of people that have used this type of meditation work to create the life of their dreams, to heal illnesses. And now science has become the language of mysticism. And yesterday I found myself falling into some stress, worrying about certain things, looking too much in the future, trying to control the uncontrollable. And I spent some time working on those lower energy centers, keeping my eyes closed, bringing awareness to them, drawing up elevated emotions of gratitude and love and optimism. And I physically felt it change. I felt my state changed. I came out of it. I felt great. I went back to the work that I had to do. I spent several hours working as well. And it became much, much more enjoyable and more productive. And I started to see the pieces fall into place.
I really like how you brought that up, actually. And to me, as someone who is just building in the current climate, I do see an increasing convergence of mind and body and spirit in popular culture. And also what you were describing there about using meditation as a tool to calm you, to prepare you, to give you the energy to then tackle other challenges. Completely appreciate that. I think when I was at university, I could not do yoga or meditate, and I found it super boring. But then after a few years of creating the startup, I relished it and I realized that it strengthened me as well. So now it's something that I do as part of my daily practice. I think from the way that you were talking, Ari, you're obviously someone who is a successful entrepreneur, and entrepreneurship is similar to doing an extreme sport. There's a lot of bodily needs that's needed, and also mental energy and strength and barriers that's needed in the work that you do. And how you talk about failure, you also talk about resilience. Would you be able to share what the lowest point in your life has been and how you were able to get yourself out of that dark mental situation?
Yeah, I find that the more that you grow, the more your challenges grow. And so in various low points in my life, I'll give you an example. One time when I was delivering pizzas in college, I had $300, and through a bunch of dumb stuff, I lost the money. I had it in cash and I lost it. Well, that was 100% of my net worth. So I went to zero. That was a pretty low moment. But in hindsight, as I've gotten bigger and there's more zeros and more commas, $300, losing $300 today might not impact my net worth as dramatically as it did that time. But the point is, measuring low states or measuring someone's sadness or someone's trauma against someone else's, I think is cruelty. I think, and also measuring your own low point, your own dark times against the dark times of that other person that you were, that's evolved, the college student, then the law student, then the entrepreneur in the first startup versus this person today. I think measuring them or comparing them is not as productive as talking about just the nature of what it means to be at a dark point and have that dark night of the soul. And what I've come to believe at this point in my life is that problems are the gifts that we grow from. And I'm not saying that's necessarily an enjoyable process per se, but my perspective about the dark times has changed dramatically, where I have an ability now to be more introspective, which only took me, 40 years to start to figure out what that means. So it's certainly not an overnight path, but I can tell you from an investment standpoint, from a real estate standpoint, the past several years have been very difficult. I mean, you had a global pandemic, which shuttered so much of the real estate business, shuttered a lot of the global markets. Then you have interest rates spike 500 basis points, which is 5% overnight on a floating rate loan. And, cities like Austin, that are obviously incredible cities for growth, had this massive influx of people during COVID, and then people started to leave. And so these types of stresses that come in the cycles of real estate, which we've experienced the last few years, posed a lot of challenges. We had to work out different loans. We had to talk with investors. We had to postpone developments. And all of these things together start to impact your own identity, your own self-image, as well as having very uncomfortable conversations where you talk to people and said, hey, we're going to have this thing built. This thing is going to happen here, but it's going to take a little longer than we thought. And those types of things, when you're an entrepreneur, your identity, your own self-worth is so tied to your business, because your business is an extension of you. And I think the greatest businesses in the world started with so much heart center and so much of a desire to grow and give something to the world. That piece of Walt Disney lives in every Disney movie still to this day. I think he's frozen in a cryo chamber somewhere, but arguably he's dead, but his heart still, still lives in all the joy and happiness we see on young kids that have no idea, who Walt Disney is, or you wear a pair of Jordan tennis shoes, the way that you feel like you can still, you can still fly through the air. I talk to young kids that are friends with my oldest daughter and, my son who's 10 years old, and they don't even know who Michael Jordan is. They just think Jordans are cool shoes, which is a funny change where that heart ends up staying in those products. So I think that coming to terms with these stressors and coming to terms with the world feeling like it's falling on you, and you see this with every great entrepreneur. Tesla was almost bankrupt if they hadn't got a government contract literally at 4 p.m. on a Friday. It was going to zero. And then all of a sudden it turns the other way. And as entrepreneurs, the more zeros, the more commas, it's like the old Biggie Smalls, more money, more problems. And I've come to realize one thing about doing billions of dollars worth of deals or being involved in billions of dollars worth of deals is billions starts with bills. And until you start to manage and synthesize those things, you start to let stress govern your decisions. And when stress is governing your decisions, that means fear is governing most of your decisions. And I've come to find that fear in some instances is actually good. When I'm scared, my senses are heightened. I can make snap decisions. I can react very, very quickly. But no organism can operate and live long when they're at a high stress state. None. No organism on this earth, they're in a stress state for too long, they die. And humans are no different. We're just, we are an organism at our very core. So learning how to use stress and using survival to react very quickly and using those cortisol spikes to do something if there's an imminent danger. But we need to come to learn that a text message doesn't mean a lion is attacking us, or, a bad comment about you on a social media post doesn't mean that somebody's trying to stab you in the throat, literally. And coming to weigh those things and learn how to develop the tools to deal with those stressors so we can make even better decisions.
I'm curious, how are you teaching your kids about failure?
I'm glad you asked that question. My father, when I was about 13 or 14 years old, gave me the book Think and Grow Rich. And it was one of the most impactful moments of my entire life. And last night, actually, I started reading Think and Grow Rich, the kids version, with my 10-year-old son. And I will remember that moment for the rest of my life. We got on FaceTime and, he read about 10 or 15 pages on his own. He's an excellent reader. He's absolutely brilliant, way smarter than I was at that age, which was not saying much, but he read it. And then we went through and read the preface together, read the biography, the short biography about Napoleon Hill. We started to read the table of contents, and it was a very impactful moment where I can start to teach them some of these things, because with children, although I'm not an expert in kids by any stretch of the imagination, being a parent is probably the most difficult thing I've ever endeavored to do in my life. Starting to read the introduction with my son and Think and Grow Rich, and starting to talk with him and be able to pass down what my father, that great gift my father gave to me, a little bit older than he was, but I think Kingston is much more mature than I was at that age and is able to digest it better. But they have seen me have vision boards on my walls since their youngest ages. They've seen me do the emotional priming exercises with Tony Robbins. They've heard me, seen my goals being written out. So they've seen this type of behavior, this emotional fitness behavior for most of their lives. And when the book came out, my kids read it, they saw it. And in fact, I wrote it at a 7th or 8th grade reading level with the hope that they could read it at the ages when it came out and be able to, I can share some of that experience with them. And my oldest daughter, Victoria, she's 13 years old now. And, being a 13-year-old is not easy stuff, coming to terms with all the different things, all the implications that means. And I think a lot of times in this social media era, being a young lady is especially difficult, not undermining the journey of the gentleman out there, but there's a lot out there that requires navigating, requires sensitivity, and I think requires this practice of figuring out how to deal with these tools to deal with the stressors that come along in our lives. So, I think the basics are always applicable, no matter what's happening or what's changing in this world. Fundamentals win championships. When we're looking at deals, there's certain metrics that we look at in terms of the location of it, the population growth, the financial metrics, the leverage, the debt you use, the interest rates that you use, the way that you calculate the exit opportunities. So many of these fundamental things are applicable in any type of thing. But at the end of the day, I'm sure there's a lot of people that went to certain business schools or have expertise in finance and things that can explain to you the particulars of maybe the formal business side of what it means to be an entrepreneur. But for me, my focus, my life work has been around the other intangibles that go into building resilience, that go into building grit, that go to build the emotional fortitude that it takes to actually show up every day in your best self to create a product that's so meaningful that you can touch millions or hopefully billions of lives.
How did you come to value the importance of that, of all the intangibles, the emotional health and the emotional resilience, and how important that is to business success?
Desperation, being miserable, feeling awful, feeling angry, feeling sad, feeling entitled, feeling inadequate. And at one point, those feelings, you have to either take accountability, take total responsibility for your life, because you realize that one day no one's coming to save you. As Michael Jackson would say, it's starting with the man in the mirror, or it's starting with with the lady in the mirror. It's you versus you. This is a 1v1 game. This is an inward game. So much of life is about psychology more than anything. Marketing is about psychology. Sales is about psychology. Understanding your customers is about psychology. Most importantly is getting to know the demons that are in your head by their first name. So you know your own triggers, you know your own insecurities. And once you start to learn how to manage those things, you can become so wildly efficient in all of your endeavors. And for me, it was going through that stuff. And I could give you a sob story about my childhood, my upbringing, and which we all have. And there's always somebody that has a harder story. And I was very blessed because I was born in America. I was very blessed to have all four of my limbs, to have my faculties, to have my health. And in seeing that I had those things and recognizing that I was, given these incredible blessings from nothing that I did myself, they were a gift, starting to take those blessings and grow on them and then go out and find different tools to better myself. And the more that I built myself, the more that I worked on myself, the more that opportunities presented themselves, the more the business grew. And at this point in my life as a 43-year-old CEO, I'm just getting warmed up. Like, this is the best I've ever felt in my entire life. And I feel like I have so much more to give. And that's an exciting feeling.
Amazing place to be in. Ari, at what stage were you in life when you realized that no one was coming to save you?
College. I went to two community colleges. I was a terrible student in high school. There's a bunch of labels that people gave me that I don't think they meant any harm by it. I think that's the education that they had around ADD and anxiety and whatever stuff they came up with. I tell my daughter now, I don't call it ADD or ADHD. I call it ADA, which is attention deficit advantage. And I could then alchemize those labels or those negatives into something positive. I had a very bad speech impediment growing up, a stutter and a lisp, and I went to 7 years of speech therapy to effectively learn how to talk. And I think the moment that I realized that I could make progress, the moment that I realized that I can improve on some of these things if I worked on them consistently, because in the short term, when you work on something, any type of skill, progress seems like it's daunting. It doesn't seem like you're ever going to get there. But then over time, over weeks, months, forget about years or decades, the progress becomes absolutely exponential. In college is when I started to really start to work on myself, started to really write some goals out, revisiting that book, Think and Grow Rich, and realizing that thoughts could be things. And then, getting through law school and then learning how to meditate and then just adding on and compounding these life skills that somehow work to invigorate and power and fuel the drive that I had to go be successful. And ultimately I started to see those drive to be successful had underlying emotions. The desire to be very wealthy came from a desire to feel free, to feel safe, to feel secure, to feel seen. And once things started to become evident, I started to be able to take myself out of the equation and started to think, instead of me, started to think of we. And when I started to have that mentality, the business just started to go to a place that's interesting, to say the least.
Hmm. Ari, I think you hinted at it a bit earlier, but I know that you have Iranian and also German heritage. I'm curious,
I
what
do.
language do you think in?
You ask such wonderful questions, by the way. I can tell why you're successful, Annie. One of my old mentors used to say, questions are the answer. If you want a better answer, ask a better question. Amateurs want answers. Professionals ask great questions. So
Thank
compliments
you
to
for that
you.
feedback.
I do think in English now, but I think culturally, I think in Farsi. Farsi was actually my first language. My first few words were in Farsi. I didn't speak English until I was a couple years old. I started to speak very, very early, very influenced by Iranian culture. But now I'm trilingual. I speak Spanish, Farsi, and English fluently, and understand a little bit the Latin rooted languages. You can kind of, it can pick up a couple things here or there. I haven't learned German yet, but it's certainly on my list. Mandarin Chinese is above that at the moment in terms of my priority. But I think culturally in Farsi, and then from a linguistic standpoint now in English, but I dream in Spanish, I dream in Farsi, and I dream in other languages that I don't even know what the hell they are. So maybe I can demystify those one day too.
Okay, interesting. How do you think that you thinking in Farsi has given you an advantage or a disadvantage in how you're able to operate in corporate America?
It's given me an enormous advantage because, Farsi is an ancient language. There's words in Farsi that there just don't exist in English. And if you look at Sanskrit as an example, there's more letters in Sanskrit. There's more letters in Aramaic that there is in English. English is, in fact, a more base language than some of the others. A lot of the Asian languages have more characters, they have more ways of expression. I wrote my thesis about William Shakespeare. I've studied Shakespeare and read Shakespeare my entire life. And when you look at what he's been able to do with iambic pentameter and what he's been able to express, if you look at some of the other poetic works of Rumi or of Hafez and Farsi, the expansion of what they've been able to express with having so much more phonetic latitude is really incredible to see. I think the greatest writing ever in the English language, certainly greatest playwright, is with Shakespeare, and I guess in an American English, probably Mark Twain. But there's a limit to this language. So I think that it's given me a much more expansive look at the world. It's given me a more worldly, global, ancient take on how things are done from an etiquette standpoint, from a forward-looking standpoint, from a time horizon standpoint. And I feel extremely fortunate to have that as my heritage.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you so much for sharing your experience, Ari. Let me close by asking you our podcast staple, which is, what do you think is one thing that will allow more people to have better mental health?
Meditation. Hands down. And I've said this many, many times, and I try not to lose the opportunity to say it. Meditation now, there's such a baggage around that it's some activity that's esoteric and it's some woo-woo stuff that you have to go to the Himalayas and you chant or need to take ayahuasca or whatever people do. And that's just so far from the truth. This is something that you do with you. It's about your own journey, but there is a technique, there is a practice to do it. And I would recommend anybody listening to this, do yourself the favor, give yourself the gift of going to see Dr. Joe Dispenza at a 7-day retreat, or doing the online course, which I've done many times, or going to learn transcendental meditation. Go learn a practice of how to keep your eyes closed, find some equanimity, and the dividends that are paid are so exponential, are so mind-blowing that it'll enhance every single part of this experience of being a human being.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that, Ari. Let me just ask you one more question, because I think it would be a missed opportunity if I don't. Where do you see AI having the most impact in your life in the next 3 years?
We're in the fourth industrial revolution. And I think of AI the same way that we would have thought of electricity, the underpinning, the enablement tool of everything else that's coming. I mean, there was a time that I would Google everything. Now I use ChatGPT 100 times a day as this assistant to get better information. But I think that it's one of the greatest blessings in the history of mankind. Just like anything, you could use electricity for an electrical chair, but it's a tool just like anything else. And I'm very confident that the custodians of AI will treat it in the best use possible. Where there be some downside to it, absolutely. There are car accidents as well, but you can also take your car to drive your children to school. Encapsulating it as one thing that's necessarily good or bad, it's back to a tool. A gun can be used to protect someone. A gun could be used to hunt. nutrients and food, or it can be used for some nefarious behavior to cause harm. I think AI is no different. And I think it is the single greatest tool for enhancement, to enhance humanity's ability to be more human that's ever existed. And I can't wait for it to continue to evolve.
Fantastic. I definitely also agree about AI enhancing humanity, and I'm super excited about what it can bring. Ari, it's been a pleasure to have you on the Low to Grow podcast. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Annie.
Thank you for listening. You excited for the next episode? Follow Low to Grow podcast on Instagram and TikTok to keep in touch with the new announcements. That's a wrap for today's episode of the Low to Grow podcast. If it resonated with you, leave a review and hit follow to help more people to find important conversations. Keep growing and see you next time.